Hello there, and welcome to the Tavern.
For a minute, I expected you to be like, "Welcome, traveler." I was like, "Oh, that'd be a really cool way to start
there.
this thing." Hello there. General Kenobi. Okay. So welcome to the Tavern.
Welcome to the Tavern. Welcome back to the Tavern.
Yes.
And we're going to be talking about world building.
Yes.
You know, I mean, within the world of D&D, there's a lot of kind of pre-created material to pull from.
There's the Forgotten Realms. There's the
insane amount of information.
Nowadays with 5th edition, they really include the multiverse into that, and like the Magic the Gathering worlds, Innistrad, Ravnica, all that stuff. You know, there's a million of them. They're all interconnected.
Yeah.
But sometimes you're not depending on a pre-made world or something you've read about, seen other people playing. You're creating your own. Yeah. So the one that I created, and there actually is a really horrible podcast that I made by myself where I briefly talked about it.
I forgot about that.
It's terrible. Anyways, it's called The Third World, and I'm not 100% sure where the idea of it being the third world came from. I started off with the concept of a city, and it was when I had first decided, like, I'm going to DM a campaign, I'm gonna create my world, I'm gonna be God, you know? And what I went on is, at the time, like, I was reading the Legend of Drizzt books a lot, which is written by a man named R.A. Salvatore, Robert Salvatore. And I had this stack of books next to me, and I was looking at his name, R.A. Salvatore. And I thought, that kind of sounds like it's from the fantasy genre. And I thought, well, what if I had this big city named after him? So I rearranged the letters and called it Ralstavor, R-A-A-L, blah, 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 stuff. So my jumping point really was this big city that was going to be like the melting pot of the realm. This was my one major settlement where everybody gets along, and everything is going to be just kind of built surrounding that. I drew a really rough map, and I pulled ideas from other campaigns that we'd played, like Fish Camp was from our very first campaign when we had a guy named Kevin as dungeon master,
our high school group.
Yeah, and Generica was a city that he had created, and I had actually messaged him at the time because we were still talking. And I said, "Hey, would you mind if I kind of take these things and adapt them into my world?" And he's like, "Yeah, sure." So my big thing is I'm terrible at coming up with names. So Ralstavor, I think, is a golden one. Like, that's probably the best name I've ever come up with, and it was just stealing somebody else's name. But as far as building on the world, you really have to kind of decide what type of a world do you want this to be. Is it going to be generic, like militant, driven by an empire kind of thing? Is it going to have aspects of technology? Is it going to be more nature-based, like magical fae kind of stuff like that? And I really wanted a blend of everything. You know, I think my idea of what fantasy worlds are is very much based on Forgotten Realms and Middle-earth. You know, and Middle-earth being, I think, kind of the idea between the third world. You've got, like, the universe, the galaxy, our Earth. You've got Middle-earth, and then the third world off to the side here. And then there's the Forgotten Realms.
Right, somewhere over there.
So it's like, mine is like, I'm going to fit in between everything here.
And then this specific continent that we're focused on is the Homeland.
It's called the Homeland, which again I took from Legend of Drizzt. The first book is called Homeland. But I thought, yeah, this is kind of like the major continent on whatever this Earth is. And at the time, I didn't want there to be an empire, you know. And what I did is I figured, okay, I'm not going to have every single race in the compendium of Dungeons and Dragons. That's really big, and I'm trying to tell my own story. So I really want to narrow that scope. So I picked out kind of the big ones. You've got humans, elves, dwarves, halflings, tieflings, and then like
Gnomeville.
Gnomes, orcs, and then like monsters. I really tried to condense it. And I think I didn't even introduce the concept of Dragonborn until one of my players said, "Can I play Dragonborn?" So what I ended up doing is, after kind of establishing, like, this is the way the different races interact, here's a few basic settlements, I started making maps. So my first map that I made was really, really rough. It was colored pencils and watercolor. I don't know why I used watercolor. That was a bad idea because a buddy of mine put his cup on it, and now there's this big ring where a cup was on it. I still have it, though. I love it. And the map has changed a little bit over time. It's obviously gotten more detailed as I've added in more settlements.
But what hasn't really changed is the shape of the continent.
The shape of the continent has stayed the same. I think I've added a couple islands outside of it, but the shape of the continent has been the same from the start. And I don't even know if you knew this, but the shape of that continent was taken from a map I drew in the 8th grade.
Really?
For a fantasy story that I had thought about writing that I didn't write.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah, I don't know where that map is now. It might be in my box of D&D stuff. But what's kind of happened recently is for years and years, the world and the culture stayed untouched. You know, things kind of developed naturally as they do through gameplay. A 2-year-long campaign created changes in the landscape. We added villages, we added cities.
Right, so when we first began our first campaign in this world 9 years ago, coming up on that, it was kind of, all the settlements were almost like their own city-states.
Basically.
That was kind of the way the world was set up. And politically, you know, each city had its own guard and things, and so, you know, there wasn't this big unification yet. There was obviously trade and things like that, and then throughout our campaign, we kind of brought some settlements closer together, drove other settlements further apart,
completely obliterated a few of them,
wiped them off
along
the map.
the way.
Yeah, as
the
you
light
do,
elves.
as you do in a
Let's
2-year
not
campaign. And then what's neat is you did a jump in time.
Yes. So there actually, in that 2-year-long campaign, there was a brief period where what happened is you guys went through a portal into the Forgotten Realms because I decided let's practice playing in a world that has already been developed. And that was a lot of fun.
It was.
The problem I had with that is that map is so densely packed with so many locations and villages and cities. I had to do a lot of research I didn't feel like doing. I prefer to make stuff up as I go along.
It's hard
a little
to
bit
add
of
your
improv
own.
is fun.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the beauties of world building as well as improv is like things change and you can kind of like make these decisions as you go along. But so they came back.
You don't want players that know too much background.
That too.
We've had problems in the past with people like calling out the DM. I'm like, well, that's not the way things are in this world. It's like, well, that's the way things are in the world that I created.
Yeah.
That, you know, so it really helps you be a little more fluid in the development of the story too.
And as a dungeon master, as the person who is responsible for portraying the world around them, I find it easier if I've created the world because it becomes more personal and it's all here. I don't have to look into other books to find this stuff out.
Yeah.
Lately, I have gotten more into writing everything out. So like my players, if they want to take it, if they want to do research to build their backstories, they can read into that. So what I've done recently is when we initially were doing that 2-year-long campaign, played in Forgotten Realms, and they came back, there was a time jump of 10, 15 years. So it's like things have changed a little bit, but that campaign ended up dying shortly after that because we moved away, had a completely new group of players.
Beginning of college.
Yeah, time's gone on and we've shifted from 4th edition to 5th edition, and I've just got a whole new group of people that I play with now. So we are now, I believe, 500 years, I think.
It's either 500 or 1,000.
It was one of those, either 500
It was a big jump.
or 1,000.
It was a big jump.
So we've got all kinds of new settlements. Now there is an empire that's tried to unite the realm because when you've been around that long and you've been through the conflicts that the original campaign went through, there's definitely divisions there. So people gotta be unified. Somebody steps up and they're like, I'm gonna do it. I see inequality around me. I want to wipe that out. I'm gonna bring everyone together and life's gonna be so much better. And then you've got like ancestral resistance to that. Dwarves are like, no, we've lived here for thousands of years. We've done our own thing. We don't want any part of that. Elves, same thing. They've lived in their forests for thousands of years. They don't want any part of that.
Or the city-states that had more power are hesitant to relinquish the
Yeah,
power. Like
yeah.
Falstavor is no longer the focal point.
No.
You know, and that's like, imagine that would have been a huge change. And so to come back to that world after those changes, as a player, we know what things were like before. But we're playing a character where this is all they know. And that's kind of really interesting.
So then what I've done with that is I've taken every settlement that's on the map and settlements that were player created when they're like, oh, my character came from here. And I was like, I never made that place, but I will now to accommodate you and just to add richness to this world. So I've created a compendium, a list of every single location, every settlement, written a description of it. This is what it was, this is what's there, kind of broadly speaking, and then you can kind of move inward for that when you're actually in there. And I've started creating NPCs, non-player characters, that you will encounter only in these locations, so that when you encounter them for the first time, if you go back, you'll recognize them, or maybe they'll meet you somewhere else down the road. At one point with my last campaign, I had a new guy joining who he's creating his character, and this person really likes soccer. He really likes sports. So when he started making his character, he's like, are there sports in this world? And I just kind of froze for a minute because I am not athletically inclined beyond lightsaber fighting and parkour. But, and that's a joke, by the way.
Yeah.
I don't know if they know that. That's a ways back. Anyways, so I froze for a minute. I was like, the only real sports that I have are tournaments, where you fight monsters, you fight other adventurers. So I created sports for the realm. 2 different sports. One that's created by barbarians, one that was created more for the people. And I created systems so that you can actually roll dice and play them in the game. And when I did that, I was like, oh my god, there's so much I haven't even explored about this world that I created. So now I've taken the time to create factions and schools and guilds and things like that, and fleshed out
the Bard's College,
the Mages Guild, all kinds of things like that, Assassin's Guild, Thieves Guild, whatever it may be. So now it's like the world has expanded to a depth that I didn't even know was there because of that one question: are there sports in this world?
Right.
And that's super fun because then I get to create more lore, and then my players that are making their characters can expand on who they are and where they've been. And so what I've done, and that's just like the outer world, that's the continent, the locations. But that helps the players help me with world building, because what I then decided is I need my players to give a crap about this world. They go on these adventures, and especially when you're new and you've never really done role-playing before, you need something that's going to get you invested in this place. Why is it important to you? Who matters? What matters? So I created a little template for tell me, who is your character? What are your hobbies? What are your fears? Who are your friends or allies? Who are your enemies? And then I asked them also create an item of interest, something that you can't find in the store, something that is special to your character. Whether it's an old scratched coin or a bear claw or something like that, I don't know. So part of world building isn't just, the actual world as it can be perceived objectively, but the subjective perspective of your characters. What do they see? What is their experience? How do they know and relate to this world?
Yeah.
It all started with a name.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Probably since you began planning, you've got a decade of this world,
Yeah.
And it's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. I know I always get excited every time you're I wrote out a new thing, or I've got a template for a new town or whatever.
Yeah, you were there from the start, so
it's really fun to read it and kind of be oh, okay, how does that play in? It just, I don't know, makes the place feel a whole lot more real.
A lot more lived.
Which is really fun. And then when you actually get to play in that world, the more that the player has an understanding of the world, the better it is, because it's this character theoretically has lived here their entire lives. If you're playing a 200-year-old elf, you would have 200 years of knowledge and comfort of at least a portion of this realm.
Yeah.
So it's having that back information for us as players to go through really helps you feel comfortable when you're actually playing the game.
And you also want to make sure that there's variation, that it's not a cookie cutter world where every city is the exact same. There's walls, there's a castle, there's guards, there's a market. I feel it's pretty standard to say there's going to be a tavern in every single place that we go to. But our last session that we played is in this world, and the settlement of Littleview, which is a conglomeration of halflings and gnomes, there's no walls, there's no castle, there's no guards. It's built in, the foothills, the cliffs overlooking the ocean, but it's a steppe village, so it's very, very different in its layout than any place else.
Well, I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
We covered it a bit.
Yeah.
So thank you for watching. If you have any feedback about D&D, we would love to hear. As you can tell, we enjoy talking about Dungeons & Dragons. kind of regardless of what the topic may be. It's
sure.
just a fascinating world and subject. So if there's anything that you would like us to talk about or any comments, feel free to let us know. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay